Are we on YouTube? Yes, we are. Oh, yes. I make it 2:30, so we'll start the formal meeting. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the scrutiny panel at North Somerset Council. If I could just read the protocol before we actually start proceedings, apologise for this, but it has to be done. This is the first virtual meeting of the Strategic Planning, Economic Development and Regeneration panel being held under the virtual meetings regulations. We're using Microsoft Teams software. The proceedings will have the same standing and validity as if they had taken place at a physical meeting in the town hall. We're streaming today's meeting live on the internet. The YouTube link for the meeting was published with the agenda. A recorded version will be available to view on the North Somerset Council website within 48 hours. I would refer councillors to the meeting etiquette and the guides to using Teams, which were previously circulated to all members. Please remember to use your headphones and to mute your microphones when not speaking, as this will improve the sound quality for everyone. Anyone using the telephone link to access this meeting can mute and unmute yourselves using the *6 button on your telephone keypads, and that works on mobile or landline phones. I will invite each of you to speak by way of a queue system. If I get it wrong, the Vice Chairman is there to help me with that, using the chat function within Teams. When you speak, please introduce yourself. If you're leaving or returning to the meeting, would you please ensure that I'm aware of this by requesting to speak? Would all non-panel members please ensure both your audio and video feeds are turned off at all times unless you're invited to speak? I think that covers the formalities under which these meetings take place. Right, well, welcome to everybody, colleagues on the council, both councillors and officers, and to any members of the public who will be out there watching proceedings. You don't need me to remind you these are trying times, trying not just for everybody, but also essentially for we colleagues who are more used to sitting in a chamber discussing with one another rather than sitting in front of cameras at distance. This scrutiny panel, for those of you who don't know, is made up of members of all the parties on North Somerset Council, so there's no party control of it, and everybody is invited to participate. My name is John Crocker-Hawley, I'm the chairman, and Mike Solomon is the vice chairman. This is a public scrutiny panel. And emphasis must be on the word scrutiny. We have the ability to propose matters, but we also have, much more importantly, the duty to scrutinise matters, and I hope we will do that. If at the end of the meeting, those who are watching from beyond the council find there are ways in which perhaps I as chairman could improve the way I conduct the meeting, do please feel free to make contact with me in one of the usual ways, and I will try to make amends. If at times you think I'm not paying attention and my eyes are somewhere else, it's because I'm trying to manage 3 screens at the same time when dealing with the agenda. So please bear with me if my eyes do not seem to be on the screen. Thank you. We now move on to item 1, public discussion. Officers, is there anybody who has... There is. Sorry?
Nobody has notified us. Nobody has notified us wishing to speak. No.
Thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Chairman, could I just interrupt? Could before going through apologies, could we take a register of members present? If that's...
I'm sorry. There's my first mistake as chairman. Yes. How would you like us to take this register?
Chairman, I'll read out the names and just ask for a response.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor John Crockford-Hawley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Solomon.
Present.
Councillor Steve Bridger.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Butte.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah Codling. Thank you. Councillor Peter Crew. Thank you. Councillor Mark Crosby.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Karen Havison.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hogg. Thank you. Councillor Hugh James.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick Keating.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Tucker has provided apologies. Are there any other members in attendance? I believe Councillor Tonkin is present. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, but I won't be making any comments as I'm the exec member.
Indeed. I'm getting your name, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Porter? No? Okay.
Councillor Terry Porter's here, but his sound is playing up.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I'll mark him as present. Thank you, Chairman. On the list.
Sorry, could I re-emphasise the need to mute yourselves if you're not speaking, but there is some interference coming through. Right, the next item, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Are there any? None, thank you. Item 4, minutes. You have all the paperwork in advance, the minutes of the two meetings in January, 3rd of January, 29th of January. Unless anyone wishes to challenge them in any way, I'll propose from the chair that we accept them. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I second that proposal, Chair.
Vice Chairman, no comments. I therefore take them as approved. Item 5, matters referred by the council or the executive. I believe there are none. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 6, the North Somerset Local Plan, the challenges and choices document, which you will all have in front of you. Today is quite a significant day, isn't it? Because from today until the 2nd of September, we commence the public consultation on the challenges section. Remind everybody that there are two parts to this book. One is the challenges, one is the choices, and we're dealing today with the challenges. And of course, I think what will be the most controversial element will be the choices, where development will actually take place. But we're not dealing with that aspect today. We're recognising the challenges which lie ahead of us, and how we determine the principles by which we guide development rather than being site specific. The feedback we get between now and the 2nd of September will then enable us to go forward with the more spatial element of the whole document, that is the choices about where development should take place. So in a way, I suppose today's session will be far less controversial than the next one coming later on in the year. Michael Reek, this is your report. I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight on the plan, and then over to any members who wish to ask questions of it.
Yes, I could say a few words, Chairman. Thank you for that. You're quite right. Just this morning, we've launched our challenges consultation, so it's all live on our website now. So I'd encourage members and everybody else to have a look at that and hopefully respond to our consultation. It is unusually for us a virtual consultation because of the circumstances we're in at the moment, but it won't be your only chance to comment. It's part of an extended period of consultation, which will run through both challenges and then what we're calling the choices part of the consultation, taking us through to the end of the year. I think I'd start really by saying thank you to the SPEDA chairman and also the wider group of members who've been working hard to help create a challenges document that reflects the council's aspirations, is clear, easy to understand and thought-provoking as well. And in my view, it's a very solid start for the very difficult issues we need to grapple with through the local plan process. And we look forward to seeing what feedback we get from our communities and stakeholders. So although the consultation is being undertaken remotely, we are working with our communications team to contact as many different groups, businesses and people as possible to try to elicit a broad response, particularly from groups such as young people we're very keen to target. We'll be using social media, we'll be putting out short videos to highlight different issues in different ways throughout the consultation period. So have a look out for those videos in particular. So the challenges document is all about the key planning issues facing the council and the council area. And the purpose of the challenges consultation is to help us sort of shape or frame what we call our strategic priorities. We identified 10 in the document that's out for consultation, and they are referenced in the SPEDA paperwork. At this stage of the process, it's not about sites or locations for development. And as the chairman says, that's the sensitive part of the process, and that comes next. And that's what we're calling choices, and what we call the identification of the spatial options. So I suggest that this afternoon's discussion is about the role of SPEDA. And firstly, is to provide a bit of a steer on how SPEDA and that wider member group can help support the next stages. Do we continue with the existing approach? Has it worked well? Can we do it differently? And secondly, to start to think about the process of developing the choices consultation in the light of the feedback that we receive. Because I think we've got to start thinking now, because although the challenges goes on now throughout August to the beginning of September, in effect, we've got September to start assessing the response and thinking about how we're going to draft the choices consultation. Because the target is to go out for consultation in the autumn, probably October, November on the choices. And that will then lead us to early next year to starting to, as a council, to think about the preferred spatial strategy. And then that will lead into a draft plan, hopefully about summertime next year. So that's all I'm going to say for now, Chairman, but happy to cover any questions that come up.
Thank you, Michael. This report forms something which we obviously take on board and we note, but equally you will want some guide from us as to how we wish to interact with you and your colleagues as you move towards thinking of the choices document. From my point of view, if my experience of this is anything to go by, the informal sessions we've had, I think, have been really productive, where we've been able to talk openly amongst ourselves, raise issues. I'm very conscious that trying to have a discussion online where it's sometimes very difficult to pick up nuance, it is in itself challenging, and is probably even more challenging if we think that we have people watching every word, listening to every word we utter, and sometimes I think we do need the benefit of a degree of privacy in the way we can discuss. And then as we move from discussing our initial ideas into more concrete forms of wordage, that probably is the time to go more public. So I would certainly like to propose that we set up our informal working groups as we have done in the past, and proceed as we have done. But always I like to put in the proviso that if any member of the council wishes to attend any of our meetings, I do think we should always agree to that, so that no member of the council ever feels excluded from taking part in our discussions. So I throw that open to colleagues to.
I would second that, Chairman.
Hello, who was that? Peter Crew
finally got in. I would second that. I think the way we've proceeded so far is excellent. It gives us the opportunity, not just members, but officers, to be a little bit more unguarded in our discussions. You can't always be in public because everything's taken as that's the word, that's what we're doing. It gives us the way to talk through what ifs far better the way we've been doing it.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair, I've asked to speak. I think we're in a different position at the moment with a lot of the online meetings we're doing now to actually, when we go to public consultation, to reach a lot more people. Because of the media process that we use, we can get out there to a lot more people, get the views back from far more people, I think, than we have in the past when we've had to hold meetings in the chambers, which have gone very well, but that it will only hold so many people. So I think we are in a great position going forward to take on board the public views.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And certainly, I'm always willing to visit parishes or other towns or visit amenity societies. That is something I enjoy doing. So going out and listening to what other people say, particularly if they're going to challenge. I think we all need to be put into a position where we feel at ease under challenge. And I think we should encourage that. And as Michael Reep says, the need, and I know Hugh James has emphasised this, the need to be able somehow to communicate with the younger age group. It is they who will be benefiting or suffering from the policies which we put forward, and it would be wonderful if they would take more of an active interest. So the more we can encourage that, the better. And as you, Mike Solomon, say, we are now in such a different world in terms of communication, and our ability to communicate, as we're doing today, via electronic means, we need to grasp it, and even people of my age need to fully accept that. So, yeah. Mike, you're helping me, I think, see if there's anybody in the
Yes, you have two people. The first person that wishes to speak is actually Mike Riggle, and after that it's Councillor Keating, and then Councillor James. So you have three in the queue at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
First being Mike Riggle.
No, come in, Mike Riggle. He's our IT person, isn't he?
He is IT. He did ask to speak, but he's gone offline.
So our IT person is incommunicado. I rather like that.
Councillor Keating next.
Thanks, Mike. I think I would agree very much with what John was saying around using this committee to interact with residents and to build our understanding. And I think in combination with doing the written consultation, perhaps there's a role for us to invite people, different groups, different perspectives to present to us or to have hearings in some way. One, because there may be people or groups that feel that they can present to us or explain to us better in an oral format rather than being constrained by the strictures of the online consultation document. But as well, I think it's useful for us to hear from different groups rather than just speaking inter alia amongst ourselves. I think, as you say, we should be challenged by different views and different thoughts and be able to have discussions and engagement with people. So I would strongly recommend we look to find a way to, whether it's informally or online, to have those discussions. Thanks.
That's an interesting idea, and I think that's really good. The idea that if people wanted to speak to us, we should be available. I don't know. Is there a danger that we could be? I don't wish to use the phrase "got at," but is there a chance that developers then would think, right, now then we'll put all of our media team into causing these councillors to subject themselves to our professional lobbying? But you know, here we are having this conversation just as we should be doing. It might be that a point comes up and with thought afterwards we don't think it's so good. But initially, Patrick, I think that's an excellent idea. I wonder if any officer has a view on that. No, they all support you. Mike, who's
Councillor
the next
James next, followed by Councillor Bridger. Councillor Hugh James next.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for being absent for a second. I'd just like to thank you, Chair, and the officers for the conversations we had outside this meeting, being able to build up the challenges document to this place. As you say, keeping young people informed and all people, all different interest groups informed is really important. Like at the moment, there's so many things going on, like these climate marches and people talking about things like Black Lives Matter, and all these things do actually feed into the local plan. You know, they're all issues about the future of North Somerset. People don't instinctively think, wow, I can create change by filling this consultation, but it's really about trying to make people see the link between the future they would like to see, and filling in what seems like a very dull consultation. And I suppose it's up to us members to try and make that link between really the future that everyone wants to see in their lives and this consultation we have in front of us today. So hopefully we can all, as members, try and communicate that, and I'll do my best to.
John, I don't know. Richard Kent wants to come in, and I'm wondering if it's in answer to your media question or it's a new one. And you also have then Councillor Bridger that wishes to speak.
Okay, well, Mike, you're in charge of the order of speaking, so you bring them in.
Let's let Richard Kent come in because it may be in response to a question you asked. So, Richard, if you'd like to speak.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, I wasn't sure if Michael was going to answer it, and you may want to add to what I'm going to say. And it was simply that we are doing our best to make sure that in this round of consultation and future consultations that we do talk to everybody that should have a view in whatever means suits, so whether that's by virtual means or something different. And it will be about engaging with the development industry as much as the local communities. We have to be talking to all sectors. I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No, I don't think so. I think that's fine, Richard.
So, Chair, the next person that wishes to speak is Councillor Bridger.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first of all, I wanted to just congratulate really everyone involved in the presentation of the document. I really think it's excellent. I'm so pleased the way we decided to do this in the end, to split this up into two phases, but this document I think is really good. I was going to say that I would be, quite keen in my ward to host a conversation with residents. I think I feel informed enough to do that. I think other members might want to do something similar, but I think it would be good if there was a uniform way of capturing the feedback from an online conversation like that. So perhaps not for now, but maybe we could have a separate conversation about if we were to hold our own online events to involve our communities, if there was a way of, as I say, capturing the feedback in a way that was common to all of us, or in a way that would be useful to members and officers. Thank you.
If I could respond to that, yes. There will be some members who obviously do much more ward work than other members, and that's commendable. I think if we're going to try to get views across the district, we need some sort of coordination in how we achieve that, don't we? Certainly, as chairman of the scrutiny panel, I would like to know when consultation meetings are taking place, not so that I can, as it were, stick my oar in, but so that I just know what's going on. And it would certainly be interesting to know at the end of a period of time how many of these meetings have taken place and in which parts of North Somerset they've occurred. So perhaps a few of us could talk about this again informally and see if we can get something set up. I think it's an excellent way forward.
Well, we have no more questions, Chair. So that
Right.
was the last speaker.
Okay, but it strikes me then that we've got three issues here. We are going to continue with our informal SPEDA meetings. We will, of course, need to report from time to time to the formal meetings, such as this, which are public meetings, and we will also begin to look at how outside presentations can be delivered to councillors and officers. Have I summed that up correctly, do you think? No, nobody is speaking against it, so I assume that's okay. So, Leo, are you clear on our intentions?
Sorry, Chairman. I was just in a discussion with a councillor trying to get on to the meeting, so I missed that bit of the discussion.
Right.
Chairman, yes, I've taken a note of that.
Yep, that's okay. So either Leo or Brent has a note. That's fine. Thank you very much indeed.
John, Chair,
yes.
we have two councillors trying to get onto the meeting, but having Councillor Codler and Councillor Cherry are both trying to get onto the meetings, but having technical issues. Just to make you aware.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next business, and if they get on, I hope they haven't missed taking part in that particular discussion. Right, the next item we have then, item 7 is Parklands, the procurement of a development on council-owned land at Parklands so-called village. You've all got the paperwork in front of you. The parish is Hutton and Locking, so I expect we've got 2 members present from those parishes. And you'll see in the recommendation we're being asked to note the report and to agree whether or not we want a further informal meeting. And I would suspect we probably do at some stage. Martin O'Neill, I think, is... yes, Martin, you are with us. Is there anything, Martin, you want to highlight in your report? I'm assuming everybody has read it, thoroughly understood it, and if there's anything you want to highlight or indeed change, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. On that basis that everybody's been through the report, I don't think there's anything significant to highlight other than some of the timings. As you'll see towards the latter part of the report, we're in the detailed solutions stage at the moment. Detailed solutions came in last Friday and they're being reviewed at the moment. We will be inviting the 3 bidders to submit their final tenders. We'll be putting that invitation out on the 10th of August, and final tenders need to come in by the 4th of September. So in terms of that second point on the recommendation about arranging a further informal meeting of the panel, that will need to be in the early half of September, between when the final tenders come in, and the report will need to be written for the executive on the 21st of October. Right.
So if we can fit that into a calendar, that would be useful. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Could I ask, on your paper, on the section headed background, where you talk about the £10 million LAAC, that's a local authority accelerated construction. It's subject to a number of conditions. We're talking about 425 dwellings, minimum 30% affordable housing. But then an area that is of particular interest to me is the modern methods of construction, the MMC reference.
Yes.
And that includes 75 volumetric units. Now, 75 out of 425 isn't very much. And does this mean that the building industry is still wed to this incredibly old-fashioned British way of developing, with bricks and mortar and taking months on end to get anywhere, indeed years on end, where we all know that if you pop across the channel to Germany, you can have a really good house, a detached 5-bedroom house, up and ready in 4 days, okay, you've got the site prepared beforehand with the concrete, but it takes 4 days to put up the house. In Britain, we are still stuck in paying nothing more than lip service to modern methods of construction. So why are we only looking at 75 volumetric units? Explain, please, okay. Martin.
Certainly. Firstly, I suspect you're right that the development industry is still in that position, but fortunately that isn't what we're asking for through this process. The Accelerated Construction Grant conditions require a minimum of 75 volumetric, and without wishing to tell you what you're probably already aware, volumetric it will be a house that is built in a factory off-site and delivered as a complete product. What the report perhaps wasn't clear enough on, and I apologise for that, is that the remainder of the 425 units have to be delivered using a panelised system. So it will still be delivered through modern methods of construction, but they'll be constructed as panels in factories off-site and brought to site. That isn't to say that the bidders couldn't decide to deliver them all as volumetric, and I would say one bidder is proposing a significantly higher number than the 75 volumetric. But even if they comply with the Homes England 75 number, the rest will have to be panelised. So it won't be a traditional construction site in the manner you were just referring to.
That's good news. So out of the 425 dwellings, all of them will be, to use a very emotive and old-fashioned word, prefabs.
I really wouldn't like to use that word, but yes, all of them will be modern methods. All will be modern methods of construction. Yes, you are absolutely right. Yes.
For those who are not old enough to remember, Weston-super-Mare actually holds the record for building a prefab at a faster rate than any other place in this country. Just after the war, it took 38 minutes to build one. And they were, of course, all constructed in Weston-super-Mare and in Banwell. So there's a good tradition, and I hope, right, it's how long, I mean, joking apart, Neil, Martin, how long does it take to construct a volumetric house in this country?
Well, the bidders that we're talking to on the side all are giving slightly different timescales for delivery, and it does depend on whether they have control over the whole process. So in other words, whether they own the factory that's going to deliver, or whether they're going to have to be partnering. But in terms of the element within the factory, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're talking about turning around the factory element in a sort of 2 or 3 weeks. But then there's the delivery and then installation on site, and there's the whole setting up of that program so that works efficiently.
But once on site, the workmen arrive with all these units, prefabricated units on site. How long now in this country is it taking us to bolt them together so that from the moment they arrive, a week, a fortnight?
I wouldn't like to give you an exact number, to be honest, without going back and checking, but it certainly isn't more than I would have thought a week or two, and
right
till it's fitted, and then the developer and contractor can move in order to then start the second phase in terms of fitting the unit out. You have to remember, before it even arrives on site, there's a whole process in terms of getting the site ready to take the unit. So that's still an upfront element in terms of getting the site prepared.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Vice Chairman, who have we got in the?
We have nobody wanting to speak on this one. So unless Terry Porter is one of the ward members wants to speak, I'm another ward member and have nothing to say on this one. So Terry, have you got anything to say?
Oh, more than happy, thanks. Right.
Great.
That's it then, Chair.
Yeah, I've just got one extra question of Martin. Martin, could you give us, in case people don't know, what we mean by the Wyvern Development Company, and could you explain a little more why it isn't up to the job?
This was in the procurement plan element, yes. I assume you're referring to. Yes. When we looked at the procurement options back at the end part of last year, One possible option was to look at delivering it through the council's arm's length development company. But as members may be aware, whilst it was set up in the sense of it's been created as a company, I mean it's a shell company, it's been created as a company, it hadn't gone beyond that and still hasn't gone beyond that. So it had no infrastructure or resources to take on a development of this scale and deliver something of this size, particularly through modern methods of construction.
Okay.
It would be a
so if it's
company trying to deliver that.
Yeah, if it's not up to delivering anything on this scale, what has it delivered?
It hasn't delivered since it was set up. It was set up on I can't remember the actual date, but it was set under the previous administration as a company that, if the council was going down that route of direct delivery, could be done through an arm's length development company. But it hasn't been taken any further, so it still sits there as a standalone company, but it hasn't delivered anything, and it doesn't, as I say, it has no resources, it has no staff or funding or anything like that at the moment.
Well, I wonder if colleagues on this panel would like at some stage to have a report on the Wyvern Development Company, which we established some time ago before the present administration, and which has done absolutely nothing. There may be sound reasons why it's done nothing, but perhaps we ought to know. Would members like to know more about it?
Yeah, I would as
Yes,
well.
please, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. So if those taking the minutes could take note of that, please. We'd want to know a bit more about the Wyvern Development Company, what it's meant to do, and why it hasn't done anything. Okay, right. Martin, anything else you want to add to that if nobody else has questions?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move on then to the next item, Metro West Phase 1. And this is largely an item to note, and very exciting. I mean, it looks, if everything goes according to plan, by Christmas 2021, the Secretary of State will have determined yay or nay. By spring of 2022, the first sod will have been cut from the ground, and by the spring of 2024, the trains will be running, notwithstanding, of course, delays which COVID-19 is bound to produce, and notwithstanding what I suppose are inevitable delays wherever rail infrastructure in this country is concerned. But, you know, hope springs eternal. Spring 2024, I shall use my rail pass to get from Weston-super-Mare to Portishead. I note we've got a full report going to Council on the 22nd of September. Whether that will be more than this, I don't know. Is any member going to take us through this, or do we have questions arising first? Is this a Colin Meadas plan? Or is it
it's
Jonathan?
It's Jonathan.
Jonathan,
Chair.
Sorry, yes, Jonathan. Is there anything you want to add, Jonathan? I mean, this is one of those highly technical documents, which is incredibly pleasant to read. So thank you for summarising it in a way that we can all understand. Is there anything you particularly want to underline or add to or draw our attention to, Jonathan?
So thank you, Chair. No, I was going to suggest in terms of some of the slides, just because we've touched upon COVID and the impact, main ones really are where we are updating in terms of the development consent order. Obviously, we would have been probably about 3 or 4 months into that development consent order. Very large planning application in simple terms that's looking to be determined. We do now have dates, as it is shown in the presentation, where we will be starting that process 5th of October. The feedback from the planning inspectorate, actually, linking back to one of the earlier items, has been that carrying out those processes digitally through means like this has actually been very successful. It's actually been quite succinct, and they've found it very useful in engaging with members of the public and the community as well. So we have had our guidance sent out to us in preparation for when we start very much most of that process online. But just some feedback there from the planning inspector, they've actually found it to be quite useful. The key for us really in terms of programme update is we are assessing what that COVID impact has done, because we are about 4.5 months behind on that particular element. But that's not to say that we've had a direct 4.5 months impact on the overall programme, because of course there is decision making within there that we are discussing with the Department for Transport and with Planning Inspectorate about how we may be able to speed up some of those processes around decision making. And also very much what we are doing on one of the other slides around enabling packages. So the paper that will be coming in September will look at what opportunities there are for us to expand the scope of the enabling packages that we were going to be originally delivering, circa about £10 million, to see if there's anything else in there that may help with our programme. So a large amount of those enabling packages are things that you would have to do based on the season, around, say, the habitats and environmental elements. And we're just going to be seeing through some of the procurement opportunities and engagement with the market, which is the large focus of the September paper. If there's anything else that the construction industry would say to us would be beneficial to our programme that we can get on with now. Trying to, out of what is a terrible situation in COVID, try and actually seek some advantages at the moment with making sure that we can look at employment opportunities where we've got an industry that has seen a drop off in certain sectors, seeing if we can help maximise our benefit from that as well. So, you know, very much along that mantra of looking to help stimulate the economy for our area in particular. So that's all kind of wrapped in with that wider enabling package. Those are the main points really from the slides, just to pull through.
Thank you, Jonathan. Mike, do we have?
Yeah, there's only one question that was emailed to me. It's a question from Councillor Bird, but I think it's about stations, and I don't think it's relevant to this meeting because this is just to note the report. So I guess it's not relevant to this particular meeting.
Okay. Well, it's with a little patience, our excitement will be rewarded in a few years' time. So, fine. Thank you for presenting that, Jonathan. Okay, and it was just for noting, so we've got no decision to make. We now move on to item 9, which is the active travel and social distancing COVID response. And this is Colin Meadus's plan, I know, and you've all got that slide presentation, 27 pictures on social distancing. And remember, this is to do with the current situation we are in, and something I know in all the wards members have been fully engaged with. Colin, do you want to take us briefly through this?
Yes, please, Chair. I just need to call it up to share with you, so please bear with me. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Better to ask if is there anybody who can't? That's it. Good. Carry on, Colin.
Yes, as John mentioned, this is an update on our approach to active travel and social distancing during our COVID response, but then it inevitably sort of crosses over with our wider aspirations around walking, cycling and active travel. So I just want to cover that towards the end as well. I mean, really what we're trying to do at the moment is provide more space for walking and cycling in key locations. As many will know, that with the social distancing measures that are in place, there isn't the capacity on public transport at the moment, on both buses and trains, and therefore, you know, there is a pressure on moving people around. And what we really don't want is everyone jumping in their cars. We need a proportion, or as many people as possible, really, to take up walking and cycling as an alternative.
We're also trying to support social distancing, particularly in our sort of key urban areas where it's particularly busy or there are really very, very narrow footways. And also, actually, in terms of begin to look towards the sort of post-COVID world, we really want to encourage a much greener recovery and actually try and lock in some of the growth that we've seen in walking and cycling levels. And I'll come to that point a little bit later in the presentation. But we've seen some really encouraging growth over the last few months. We've been getting funding from DFT to support this work. They've done it in 2 phases. Phase 1 was recently awarded, and rather encouragingly, our indicative allocation of 95,000 actually became 106,000, and DFT were very clear that those authorities that had done particularly strong applications were being rewarded with additional funding. Conversely, there are authorities around the country that didn't get their full indicative allocation because they judged their applications to be weak. So that was a positive start in terms of this process for North Somerset Council. Since this presentation was put together, we now know that our indicative allocation for phase 2 is £379,000, and we have to put the application in by the 7th of August. So DFT have given us about 3.5 weeks basically to prepare that bid. And just to put that sort of in context, this funding represents about half of our usual integrated block programme that we would seek to deliver over 12 months. And we're being asked to deliver it in a very short space of time. So your officers are working very hard at the moment. The bottom point as well, because of COVID, it obviously has had a very substantial impact on our capital programme. There was a period of time where very little work was going on, and also with this opportunity of DFT funding, we are having a look at rewriting the capital programme to sort of reflect the delays and make the most of this opportunity of the additional funding. So that is something else that is being worked on at the moment. I won't dwell, because I'm conscious of time, too much on this next slide, but suffice to say that we've got a programme that really focused in the first instance on temporary traffic management measures and works that sort of went in parallel with the gradual lifting of the lockdown. So looking at schools, then looking at sort of town centre locations. We're now moving towards actually looking at more permanent measures rather than temporary measures. So that's sort of how the programme basically unfolds over the last few months and the next few months. The sort of process that we've been following, obviously there's lots of people who've had lots of ideas, some from internally from officers. We've been contacted by members of the public, we've been contacted by town and parish councils and members, and we're trying to go through a sort of prioritisation process. We've started with the same process that we did with our usual capital programme, but have adjusted that in light of sort of the emergency priorities around achieving social distancing. We've also obviously looked at equalities issues through that, and have been engaging and doing consultation as well as far as we're able. And it has to be said, you know, some of these schemes literally have been dreamt up on a Monday and have been implemented by the Friday. So we're having to move at a very fast pace. But obviously for some of the more permanent measures, we will take a bit longer and engage more widely. But it's been quite an interesting exercise in how to move quickly in response to this emergency. Again, I won't dwell too much on this, and I think many members will be aware of actually the measures that are out on street at the moment. Many of these are still in place. Some have been removed as government guidance has changed, or the issues in a particular location have demanded it. But that gives you an idea of the sort of temporary locations that we've implemented measures to support social distancing. Similarly, we've done some work around some high priority schools. So this was locations where there were particularly narrow footways and large numbers of reception year 1 and year 6 children, who were the ones that were prioritised over this last term for return to school, where we did some works. We're now actually looking at these again for September and how we can perhaps make them improve upon them, or in some instances make them permanent. And then we're looking at a further batch of schools where there wasn't so much of an issue with the relatively small numbers of children that returned to school during June and July, but obviously with the complete return of schools in September, there may be further issues that we need to look at in terms of social distancing. In terms of sort of permanent schemes, I've referenced the prioritisation framework. It's a sort of points approach and focusing on sort of 3 themes. These themes have partly been drawn from the DFT guidance, because obviously we want to put a good bid together to win the money, but also in terms of sort of corporate priorities around responding to the climate emergency. And again, I won't dwell on this, but those sort of 3 broad interventions break down into more detail, and they're allocated a certain number of points. And this is something that we've tested with a group of members that are supporting this work stream, which I'll talk again a little bit about later. Just to expand a little bit on why we focused on those 3 areas for our criteria. In terms of health, there's lots of evidence, and you will all know that actually walking and cycling and doing regular exercise has really significant impacts actually in terms of health benefits. And you can see a summary there. And actually across a surprisingly wide range of different health conditions, ranging from depression, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, diabetes, even fractures and the like. And so if you're not already doing it, cycling or walking for 20 minutes a day has a really big benefit for your health. Again, this is a very busy slide, but what this is sort of summarising, if I was to sort of summarise it, basically, what this says is that most people and a lot of businesses tend to overemphasise the importance of car traffic and parking to their business, and they tend to underestimate the importance of people who walk and cycle to their local shops. And actually, what walking and cycling does is have a very positive economic impact. They tend to spend more money basically because they tend to hang around for longer than someone in their car. Again, this slide, there's a lot going on in this slide, but again, if I was just to briefly summarise it, it's basically saying that a large number of the car trips that still happen on our roads are really short distance, less than 2 kilometres or sort of just over a mile or less. 40% of trips are by car, really short distances. So there's a real opportunity there to try and switch some of those trips to walking and cycling. And if you can do that, that has a really big carbon impact. We know transport still accounts for about a third of carbon emissions in the west of England, more in North Somerset. So actually, if you can switch some of those really short distance journeys to walking and cycling, you'd have a really big benefit on carbon. So that's been very much the sort of work up until now. As I mentioned earlier, we now have got the opportunity to put a bid to government for the 7th of August, and that's much more focused on delivering some more permanent improvements rather than the sort of temporary measures that we've seen so far. And really what the criteria around that is achieving modal shift, as we're already talking about, doing something transformative. So government is very much looking for ambition, and that's very clear in their guidance. We obviously need to focus on key corridors and destinations, and this is the link back to public transport. They're quite keen that we're targeting areas where actually we need to provide an alternative to public transport while there is a restriction on the capacity that can be used, and we're doing that by looking at sort of green and active neighbourhoods, focusing on schools, looking at quiet lanes and closing roads, providing strategic links, really focusing on access to our high streets and district centres and those key connecting corridors as well. So I'm just going to really run quite quickly through these, but they give you sort of some images around green and active neighbourhoods. Is this one? This is about really looking at our residential streets and trying to make them a much easier place to move around by walking and cycling. And we've got a number of locations around North Somerset that we want to look at and work on. In terms of schools, as well as the schools that we showed earlier, there's some others that we want to look at, where we think there are additional measures that we can take that can support walking and cycling. We've got some quiet lanes, and we're particularly looking at the sort of the moors and the area between Nelsey and Clevedon and down to Yatton. We think there's some real opportunities there, and certainly those were locations that we saw big increases in cycling during lockdown, and we think there's an opportunity to build on that. Our high streets, so we've done quite a lot of work in many of our high streets in the main towns, many on a temporary basis, but we want to look at how we can do some more permanent improvements in those locations. And then in terms of some of those corridors, and I think many of us know that for Weston-super-Mare in particular, it's got quite a good walking and cycling network sort of around the town, but when you approach the town centre, it disappears. And actually, we're looking at a couple of routes, one along Hildesheim Bridge and one sort of Milton Road, Baker Street, to really try and penetrate into our town centres and create those sort of strategic links that are currently missing. But elsewhere as well, I think there's some really interesting stuff that we can do in Clevedon as well. I mentioned earlier about the increase in cycling, and here's a bit of a graph that shows that just compares 2019 to 2020. It's a 7-day rolling average, which helps smooth it out a bit, but inevitably with something like cycling, the weather does play a factor as well. So some of those drops that you see in the orange 2020 figure is when we didn't have such good weather, but obviously when the sun comes out, it picks up again and the numbers go up. But you can see that, you know, during that lockdown period, we saw a very significant increase in the amount of cycling on some of our key cycle routes across the district, and you know, that's very encouraging and something that we want to try and capitalise on and lock in terms of a benefit. We are moving at pace. As I said earlier, you know, we're being given very short deadlines by government in terms of how we'll respond. The way we've approached this from a sort of governance of the work stream, we've got 2 officer groups, one sort of focused very much on the highways and transport work stream that I've been talking about, but there is a separate work stream looking very much at sort of town centres, and there's a separate pot of money from MHCLG to support town centre activities. Inevitably, there's quite a lot of overlap between those two work streams, and that's why we've got a steering group to oversee that. And also we've wanted to ensure that there's proper member input into this. So a member reference group has been established, which there are about 8 or 9 members on, a mixture of the executive members who've got the relevant portfolio coverage, the chair of the licensing committee, because actually one of the things that government has also done is simplify and shorten the licensing process, and obviously in some instances that has a highway impact. So we've had to deal with that as well. And then we've also tried to make sure there's a sort of geographic spread and a rural representation in that member reference group. Doesn't make decisions, that group. Any formal decisions go through the usual process. This is just a place for us to sort of check as we go through our activities. I've talked about the High Street Safer Opening Fund, and this gives a little bit more detail about it. That's £190,000. It's partly about physical measures on the highway, but it's also about a lot of communication and promotion activities as well. So there's overlap, but then there is sort of unique activities that the High Street Working Group are looking at as well. This particular pot of money has lots of restrictions about what you can do with it, which we've given a bit of a summary of in the presentation. Again, I wasn't planning on going through this. Members have got the slide deck, but you can see that there are quite a lot of things that are out of scope. Though I would just say one thing, that after a lot of pressure from councils, including ourselves actually, the chief exec got involved in this one, the point about planters that you will see in the top right hand corner there, which were out of scope, has now been confirmed that we can use this money to provide planters, which is very encouraging, because I think we would all agree that the red and white sort of plastic flood barriers are not perhaps the most attractive piece of infrastructure that are on our streets. So we have now just this week started looking at those locations where we might be able to replace some of those plastic barriers with something that's a little bit more attractive. I think I've covered a lot of this, but in terms of sort of next steps, obviously we need to keep the temporary elements under review and revise them where appropriate. We need to build up this sort of pipeline of schemes as we move towards the more permanent things that we want to implement. And then we need to get on and implement it. Again, one of the criteria that government has given us is that all this additional money that they provided for phase 1 has to be spent within 8 weeks. For phase 2 has to be spent by March. So as I said earlier, we're having to do this very much more quickly than we would normally. And the other thing that is sort of we've been progressing in parallel, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, is the active travel strategy. Your slide there says September executive. That has already been postponed back to October, because the officer who was working on that, we have had to divert to support the bid that we've got to get in for the 7th of August. So that's a really good example of how we're having to juggle resources in what is quite a dynamic situation at the moment. Just to give you, to sort of whet your appetite slightly though for that October executive and the active travel strategy, we've just got here a sort of a bit of a summary of the sort of structure that we're looking at, and how we want to bring in themes around responding to the climate emergency, obviously supporting our COVID-19 response, links across to public health and green infrastructure, supporting the local plan, which you obviously talked about earlier, and really what will be different, and really what the active travel strategy is trying to do is recognise that it needs to take a much higher profile in our transport planning than perhaps it's done in the past, notwithstanding the successes that we've actually had, and we estimate that in the last 5 years we've seen something like a 30% increase in cycling, which sort of goes against the national trend. But what the active travel strategy is trying to say as an ambition is that, you know, we want to see a sort of order of magnitude step forward, so more like a 300% increase rather than a 30% increase. I think it's not just about infrastructure, and again here we're just sort of flagging up, this is also about sort of culture and attitudes, so we need to think about those types of issues as well, and then, you know, the plan goes on through objectives, delivery, monitoring and evaluation, and the usual things that you would expect to see. So that's it from me, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. That's very, very thorough report. If I could just kick off, it's amazing, isn't it, what an emergency will do to concentrate the minds. How quickly things change when we're forced to change them. But something Colin very gently hinted at, but didn't actually expand, but I will expand. I'm concerned about the effect all this is having on our staff. In some areas of our highways operations, we're a third short. And that means that staff are having to do not only the work they would normally be expected to do, but they're having to respond quickly to the current emergency. And so I think we need to be very aware that staff are under unbelievable pressure. It's partly national. We have a shortfall of engineers. It's also partly because, I have to say, North Somerset doesn't pay as much as the surrounding authorities pay their staff, so there's an issue there. But staff are certainly working to the grindstone on this. A number of issues which did come up that I would like a little more explanation on. I'm just looking through. Yes, you had the long list of requests under your process, ideas and various concepts under consideration. Have those requests been tabulated in any way? So, I mean, we as a scrutiny panel have no idea what these requests might be. So I presume you are coordinating them, Colin, and between you and the executive member, you will be aware of what everybody has suggested. You go on to refer to a DFT volunteer strand. I'm not actually aware what that is, so perhaps you might care to explain. A little further on in your report, assessing the need. Now, I find that interesting. Phase 2, the permanent schemes, you talked about it contains 11 scoring categories in 3 broad themes. 20 points maximum for safety and public health, 15 points for socio-economic recovery. Then I'm whacking 25 for climate emergency. Who actually created this list of priorities, and under what was the consideration of putting them in that order? And then at the end of the report, you do make reference to this member reference group. Now, the first I heard of it was when I read this report, and yet it's up and running. Who has caused it to be created? Who actually has put people onto this member reference group? Who are the members on it? I have absolutely no idea. I'd like to know a bit more about that, please. I'm very pleased to see that you use words like keeping things under review and adjusting and learning. That is very important, isn't it? And if I could just finish off, Councillor Tonkin and I are both proud possessors of North Somerset Council loan bikes, and I can certainly confirm the rise in bicycle use in Weston-super-Mare. And patting myself on the back, as it were, at 7:30 this morning, I was cycling along the prom, and the prom was occupied entirely by cyclists, walkers, joggers, and even some people in the sea. So there is certainly a growing demand. On one day during the lockdown, when I cycled from Royal Sands to Anchorhead, I counted 77 people on bicycles and skates and other forms of pavement propulsion. Now, 77 on that one journey between those 2 locations shows a real increase. And we've got a dilemma, haven't we, Colin, in that it was very comfortable then, because few people were walking, and Marine Parade was given exclusively over to people to walk and cycle. We're now getting back to what was the previous system, and vehicular traffic is now taking over again, and it's becoming more difficult for cyclists to negotiate the roads, as you rightly said, certainly in the town centre. And 3 cheers to you all for having turned Regent Street into a cycle and pedestrian zone only. It's a real pleasure to walk and cycle down there now. So we've learned something, haven't we? Mike, who have we got?
Okay. Yes, we have a long list. We have a long list of speakers, Chair. I don't know who's trying to speak at the moment, but first of all, I'd like to echo what you said earlier about the officers. They're working under a great deal of pressure. They're putting in long hours, and I don't think we appreciate it enough. And I, for one, really do appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this and is going into it in the future. So thank you from me. The first person that wishes to speak is Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, Colin, I just really want to echo that. I really want to say thank you for your and your team's hard work. I can't tell you how excited I am about all these plans and projects. I totally support it all, and I wish you all the best. And especially with your 3.5 weeks deadlines and your 8 weeks deadlines, it sounds an absolute nightmare to try and get all this off the ground. So really well done. I'm really, really happy and totally supportive. So I hardly dare ask one little question, which is in the executive meeting in January, we came up with a plan of 20 mile an hour speed limit areas and traffic calming measures. And there was meant to be a pro forma for interested parties to put in applications for that. And as far as I know, that pro forma isn't there yet. Now, I can totally understand why, or is it there and we just haven't spotted it yet? Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for your kind words. Please keep them coming. That's really encouraging. But particularly on the point about the 20 mile an hour, yes, I mean that work stream was delayed, but it is something that we have now picked up. We do have a working draft that is now prepared. It is stuck with a colleague who I'm keen inputs on it, but that particular colleague is sort of really in the thick of some of our COVID response at the moment, and bluntly hasn't managed to get round to looking at it yet. But we do have a sort of working draft that we'll obviously be taking to the exec member as soon as possible. Obviously, in January, what we also talked about was sort of piloting the approach that was set out in that in Backwell and Rington. And actually, just today, it looks like we've now got those schemes agreed and signed off with the parishes. So we should be able to get the works orders out in the next few days and hopefully get those first 20 mile an hour speed limits in. Hopefully by the beginning of September. I'd like to get them in by the time the schools go back, but it's a bit, to be honest, it's a bit touch and go whether that's going to be possible. So we have been making progress. It's not gone quite as fast as we would have liked, but things have moved forward.
Right, Chair, the next person to speak is. Thank you, Karen. Is Councillor Keating.
Thanks, Mike. And I would echo the comments of the others. This is a hugely impressive piece of work and lots of really exciting ideas. Just a couple of questions and comments. One, it's really positive to see later in the document, I think, around in the stage 2 bit around the schools, that plans for improving safe travel to Churchill Academy are mentioned. I think we really need to recognise that work is needed in the villages and the rural community. So that's positive to see. And I'd be keen perhaps offline to discuss further what that looks like and how we as a community can support that. It's an area where I think there's wins in terms not just of safety and active travel, but in improving safety and improving the amenity of the village by reducing some of the parking and traffic issues. That's great. I think the other question is you referred to some government funding that's being offered to support a number of these schemes, but is that 379,000 really sufficient? Are we trying to do too much in this plan with too little money, or are you confident that the funding for all these various schemes can be secured in the time that's needed, or do we as a council need to push government and our MPs to help with this more? Cheers.
Yeah, I mean, on the Churchill, I think there's a meeting trying to be set up involving the relevant local members. So if you've not already been contacted, you should be in the not too distant future. I mean, on the funding point, you know, it's not going to surprise you me say no, it's not enough money, and you know, we're not going to be able to do absolutely everything that's sort of set out in that report. So we're trying to identify and prioritize those locations that have the biggest impact. But this is also why I explained how we're looking at and trying to reprioritize our own capital resources to try and top up the funding that we've had from government. Because if we're going to go in and implement some of this stuff, we'd like to try and do it as well and as complete as we can in one go, rather than, you know, have to come back. But inevitably, in some locations, we're not going to be able to do it all, and we're going to have to phase have to phase things. But I think as well, you know, John mentioned this, that there's nothing like an emergency to sort of engender creative thinking. And I feel slightly guilty taking all your praise, because actually, you know, I'm just sort of the figurehead for a whole group of people behind me who are working really hard and really responding well. And I have to say, the sort of creative thinking and the way the teams have approached this has been amazing, actually. And I think we've moved forward quite a lot in terms of how we go about some of these schemes and what the art of the possible is in probably a much shorter space of time. And I was talking with someone the other day, we've probably moved in about 3 months, which I would have estimated us probably would have taken 12 to 18 months if it wasn't for this crisis. And I think that's really positive and encouraging. But no, we don't have enough money. But this is where, you know, phase one, you know, we got awarded bonus money because we put her in a really, really strong bid, and that's what we've got to try and keep doing and maximise those opportunities, but also do the lobbying as you were talking about.
Right, we still got quite a few to get through, Chair, so I'll press on if you don't mind. That the next speaker is Councillor Bridger, followed by Councillor Crosby, who thinks I've forgotten him.
Thank you, Mike. I'll be brief. Yeah, similar to others, really. Great report. Had a sneak peek of some of these slides at a recent climate emergency session, which Colin came to. Very exciting. Really pleased actually to see Colin talk about the fact that this is not just good for the environment. It's obviously good for people's well-being, but it's also good for the economy. And there's absolutely real evidence, certainly I think in urban environments to back that up. Also good to see mention of the culture piece, the culture and attitudes, that the need to have to shift, to nudge behaviour change. I think we as ward members probably have a role in that too. I'm happy to take that on. But it is circular, obviously. People would be more inclined to walk and cycle more if they perceive it to be safe. So it's all, as I say, it's all circular. Really pleased to see that officers are looking closely at what we might be able to do to the network of roads between Nelsey, Clevedon and Yatton. As John, as you were saying, we've now got a situation that as we've got increasing vehicular traffic, we now have cars and lorries mixing with hugely increased number of cyclists and walkers on some routes. So it's to the extent where it's becoming a little bit hairy on some routes. Just a quick reference to the temporary measures still in place around schools to support safe routes to schools. I think I've seen reference to a survey, a Sustrans survey, and I think, I'm not sure if Colin can speak to this, I think that's for ward members to try and encourage our residents to complete, but I'm not 100%, haven't got 100% clarity on that, but as I understand it, the temporary measures in place will continue to be in place through the school holidays into September. But there's that survey, isn't there, Colin?
Yeah, so it's not just the schools, actually. We've tried to put that up at all the locations where we've got temporary measures. It's something called Space to Move. It was something that Sustrans already had in place, and actually a large number of local authorities are using it as a way of quickly gathering feedback on particularly the temporary measures that have been implemented, so that we can look at whether there's a sort of public appetite to maybe make them permanent. That won't be appropriate in every location. Some of them are always going to be temporary and will need to be removed at some point. But some, and John's mentioned, Regent Street. That there was always a plan to make that permanent, and we've brought that forward, and as he said, it's by and large it's gone down very positively, and locations like that we want to see where we can lock that in. On the schools, you're right, we are leaving the measures in place. We did have a debate about whether we should remove them for the summer holidays, but it was partly resources and partly we'd gone through a whole load of communication once putting them in. We didn't want to have to do that again, having taken them out and putting them back in again. So we thought it better to leave them in place and focus on engaging with the schools about what elements have worked well and where we might want to make some of the proposals permanent. And so that's how we've been dealing with it. Otherwise, you'd potentially have ended up with, in, out again, and then in again as a permanent measure, and that just becomes a little bit sort of messy and difficult to manage from a communications point of view. But you're right, I would encourage members, if they can, point people to that space to move and encourage people to respond. We have seen a little bit of evidence of people grouping together and sort of doing mass responses and using social media to try and distort the views. So we do have to watch that a little bit. But I think it is a helpful way of quickly gathering feedback on some of the measures that we've had to implement very quickly.
Through you, Chair, will ward members get an opportunity to see the Sustrans survey response if our wards are affected?
I don't see why not.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I don't see your questions, because we have 3 more people in the queue waiting to speak, and I'm conscious of time. So we've got next we have, it's your turn, Councillor Crosby, followed by Councillor Cherry, and then Councillor Butte.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. I'm grateful, Colin, for the explanation you've provided with respect to the perceived value that retailers and others, restaurateurs and so forth, place on cars. Without cars, their view is that therefore they have no business. There must be cars, therefore I have business. If there aren't any, that's it. I think a lot of councillors, me included, have come face to face, literally, with that at times in certain parts of Clevedon, for example. And it is clear that they do have a perceived value of what cars are. From my own standing in queues, watching what's going on in certain places, I've noticed that clearly there are spaces. What people are judging it on is the spaces for owners and employees of those car spaces, the spaces for residents in streets where people live, but they have shops on the ground floor and so forth. And then, of course, the spaces for pedal and pedestrian footfall. I just can't help thinking that hopefully if we move towards whatever normality is, a second wave may come, and at that opportunity, and that's one of the opportunities where we will be able to be much clearer about what the benefits are to that increased pedal and pedestrian footfall, because in my personal experience, precious few retailers really understand it or acknowledge it at all. That's something we can build on in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
Nick, next, I don't know if she's still there, but it's Councillor Cherry. Are you there?
Hello, I'll just be very brief. Thank you, Colin, that was brilliant. I would agree with what Karen Havison said about the 20 miles per hour, because I thought that all of these moves would be much better if we did have 20 miles per hour restrictions on the roads, because then we would definitely have a safer environment. I think it just improves the whole thing. But the main thing I was going to ask you about was, have we managed to come to some sort of ideas about what we're going to do about the disabled or disabled access, and how we're going to, because I keep getting huge anger from the disabled and older community who rely, unfortunately, they're very heavily dependent on cars. They're getting very angry, and I'm trying to explain that we're doing this for climate change and other things. But how are you working with disabled groups, and for example, on this?
Yeah.
So
let me just come back to the 20 mile an hour, because again, it's a bit like what we were saying about car drivers. The thing about 20 mile an hour is that people tend to overestimate the safety aspects about 20 mile an hour speed limits, and underestimate the benefit that they provide for sort of walking and cycling, and the two go together, obviously, but you have to be careful with 20 mile an hour speed limits that you don't actually create a false sense of security, because actually there is evidence that sometimes 20 mile an hour can make, if you do them wrong, can end up being less safe, because people think, oh, it's only 20, I can walk out in the road and get run over, and so it still has to be thought about quite carefully, and put in the right way, in the right locations. But where there is a lot of evidence is that if you have 20 mile an hour speed limits, again, it creates the sort of traffic environment that you see a more organic, natural growth in walking and cycling. So from my point of view, I'm much more interested in 20 mile an hour zones or speed limits from a walking and cycling point of view than I am from a safety point of view, because quite often, and I would include Backwell and Rington in this, we don't have an accident problem in those locations. It is all about perception. And if you can shift perception, absolutely, you get more people walking and cycling, but it isn't necessarily a safety issue per se. So I just wanted to say that while I had the opportunity. In terms of the disabled, I mean, it is something that we're very mindful of. I think it's true to say there were a couple of times where we've been acting at speed, and we've implemented things that have unintentionally made things a bit more difficult for disabled people, and we've had to go back and adjust, as we've said before, our proposals, and make sure that we relocate disabled bays, and that's something that we're really mindful of. On the steering group, we've got Anthony Rylands, our officer involved. So he's now fully engaged in the process, and obviously he's commenting on plans. But Regent Street is a really good example. I had a letter this morning that Councillor Tonkin passed to me from a community about, you've closed Regent Street, but that's where the disabled parking was. Well, actually, we've relocated that disabled parking round the corner, so then it becomes a communication exercise and making sure that actually we get that information out there to people. And I think that hasn't always happened, or people have missed the communication that we have put out. But it's something that we're very mindful of.
Great, thank you.
The last one on the list then is on my list is Jill Butte, Councillor Butte.
I'm last. How nice. Well, I would obviously support everything that everyone else has said, and it's a catalogue of great projects. So let's hope we can all see them as soon as possible. So my question is, I've had quite a flurry of complaints from residents in Wirral out walking, since they've been allowed to. One is even written to John Penrose. And what they're asking for, and I'm asking if this is going to be included in the walking and cycling paths part of the plan, will we have more signage as to where cyclists cannot be? i.e. cycling on pavements, because from the sounds of, these residents, there have been some very near misses on the Queensway in Wirral and several of the other sort of roads, which I suppose the pavements are relatively narrow. And they say there aren't any signs with no cyclists. Now, that may be an exaggeration, but I haven't seen many. So that's one part of it. I mean, you probably can't answer that now. I'm just asking if perhaps that could be included, that there's more signage about no cycling on pavements. My other one was just to say on the toilet thing, I'm sure all the plans have already been done for that, but I was only going to say, and I expect for most people who've been to Wells Somerset toilets, they are absolutely remarkable. You don't touch anything. Everything is hand automated, absolutely everything in the toilets. And I wouldn't think when you look at them that they have got any issues with drug dealing and all the other manner of things that I know, and we all know actually, and certainly in Weston, that we get going on in Grove Park toilets. And the things that we get going on there are disgusting. And it's just a constant thing of high maintenance costs and toilets being blocked because some people got nothing better than to do than stuff toilet paper down them. So I was just going to say, I don't know what these toilets are going to be like. I just hope and pray they might in some way mirror the toilets that are in Wales. And if you haven't seen them, and if anybody else hasn't seen them, I think they're amazing, absolutely amazing.
So,
okay,
right, sorry, I'm going to interrupt as chairman. We are not going to start discussing public lavatories. We'll be here until this time tomorrow.
No, that was it.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, Jill, you might be confusing me with Colin Russell, who is responsible for toilets. I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. If I could.
Okay, sorry, Chairman's taking over. We are not discussing public lavatories. Neither are we discussing the nonsense. I'm sorry, Jill, but the nonsense that Wells doesn't have a drugs problem, but Weston does. No, you show me any town and any village with. Sorry, we're not going into that. We're not going into that conversation. And I'm pleased to hear that John Penrose is taking an active interest. I look forward to right.
Shall I?
Colin, did you have something to say?
John?
Colin,
just this point about signs about no cycling. I have to be honest.
Pointless.
I don't particularly support signs saying no cycling because I think it's a universal issue. You will have example. I'm sure every member here can probably cite an example where they've seen cycling on pavements in their own community, and so you would end up littering and spending very large amounts of money putting signs all over the place.
Okay, I'm going to cut this conversation. So sorry, Colin.
So I think it's more about. Sorry, John. Can I just finish? I think it's more about culture, and it's creating a sort of a much more positive culture around cycling and creating the right environment where actually cyclists feel safe so that they don't feel that they have to break the rules and cycle on pavements, but that they can actually use cycle paths or use the roads. So I think that's a much more positive response to the issues.
Thank you. The problem is with all signs, if you put them up somewhere and you don't put them somewhere else, somebody says, oh, I can do it because there isn't a sign telling me not to. The number of complaints I have from people in the woods in Weston, when you talk about not causing damage or not lighting fires, and people say, there aren't any signs telling us we can't. And I'm sorry, Jill, but you try enforcing keeping people off pavements. It will not work.
Chair, I thought you said that this subject was over, Chair.
It is over.
We've no more speakers.
Right. We're now moving on to item. My one screen's gone blank.
Panel works. It's item number 10, Chair.
Sorry,
item number 10.
Yep, my iPad went blank. The panel's work, item number 10. I think this is largely going to be for noting And given the situation we're in with coronavirus, we're going to have to adjust things in any case. So with your agreement, I would suggest we just note it and expect there to be some changes. Does anybody wish to discuss it? Leo, is that a satisfactory?
No, nobody's asking any questions,
Yep.
Chair. There are no questions on this one yet.
Leo, is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just the point that the plan before you is a pre-COVID plan. Things have changed so much. It's clear we need to fundamentally review the plan. There's not really enough time at the meeting to do that now. So the suggestion is that we arrange a meeting to an informal workshop or meeting to take that forward.
Everybody happy with that? Good. Okay, we now move on to item 11, the Housing Infrastructure Fund and the Grant Determination Agreement. It's slightly complicated. If you've got your paperwork in front of you, there are, first of all, there's the Housing Infrastructure Fund Report 11. Then there's the SPEDA Supplementary Dispatch Letter and the exempt item. The Supplementary Dispatch Letter requires me to tell you this is an item that has been brought forward with a degree of urgency, and I've used my chairman's prerogative to do that. That introduces us then to the exempt item, and anything on that exempt item in the red papers, if anybody wishes to refer to that red paper, we will have to go into an exempt session. But everything on report 11, which is the lengthy HIF and the grant determination allocation, is up for discussion. So I will ask you all to refer to report 11, which, as we know, is a very lengthy report, and we have the two Jonathans, I think, dealing with this. So you'll see in the recommendation on 11, we're asked to note the agreement, and we're asked to note the governance management, and that will then, it's come from council to us, and it will be going to the executive on the 29th of July, and the papers then accompany it. Now, will Jonathan want to speak to it, or will you simply want members to raise points? How would the officers like to respond? Right.
I think, Chair, if members have obviously had an opportunity to read through and conscious with time as well, I think if people would like to go straight into maybe some of the questions and we can take it from there, that would sound sensible. Okay.
I mean, it is a very detailed report, but it actually covers most of what has already been in a way determined. So I remind you that we are scrutinising this. It's not our policy. It's for us to question it, and then the executive members and the executive will take it further. Vice Chairman, do we have anybody?
Yes, Councillor Hamilton has asked to speak.
Karen, over to you.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Yes, this is clearly a massive project which impacts my ward. One half of my ward is delighted, the other half of my ward is not so delighted, which is a real dilemma. So my first point, I've made a little list of concerns, which, if that's all right, I'd like to share with you.
Please, yes.
My first concern is that on page 3, paragraph 3.4, we mentioned the positive impact on Banwell, but I couldn't find anywhere else where the negative impacts further downstream, i.e. in Sanford and Churchill, are mentioned. And I really feel these need to be discussed up front, not as a little afterthought. And similarly, the active travel strategy, not just for Banwell, but also linking those other two villages, especially as that is the route to Churchill Academy from Banwell and Sandford. So I think that all needs, and especially with the inspirational talk we've just had from Colin Meaders about their active travel strategy, I think it's really, really important that that team is linked into the Banwell bypass scheme. So that was my first concern. My second concern, I know we haven't got a detailed route. It's up for discussion and consultation, but there's one section which, regardless of what our final precise route will turn out, is concerning me, and that is the second little section which bypasses Castle Hill, because no way can we route it without actually cutting through the AO and B. There's no space anywhere else, and I think that hasn't been mentioned. There's also a water extraction protection zone there, and that hasn't been mentioned. So that is a real problem, I think, a real issue. The other thing, that somewhere there's the risk assessment and the likelihood, and the score is given about the likelihood of each of those risks which are discussed. And I noticed that COVID risk is amongst them. It's been given a score of 12. I don't know exactly how these numbers were allocated, but it isn't the maximum score. And I think it's probably an underestimate, sadly. I mean, we will probably know in the not too distant future whether it's an underestimate or an overestimate. So, in final remark, I have to confess that this project has caused me really sleepless nights, because in general I do not support extra road building, because new roads do not mitigate traffic and environmental problems in the long term. They do short term wise, but usually they create as much traffic as they resolve. But that's another issue. But Banwell is in such a desperate situation that I've overruled my concerns, because there are many positive aspects to this scheme as well. But I really need to emphasize that this is the largest infrastructure project that North Somerset will oversee in many years. It will have a big impact on our carbon footprint, yet the report does not mention our climate emergency declaration or the legally binding carbon reduction target to 0 set by government by 2050. It's not mentioned once, and I think that's a massive omission. Our draft challenges in choices, in contrast, emphasizes all the climate emergency issue. So we need to connect the project to it. We need to make sure that the climate emergency is considered as an essential element in this project. This project needs to encourage active travel as much as rerouting cars. Thank you.
Mike, before you go on to the next speaker, if I could just add, Karen, thank you for that, because I think that really exemplifies the dilemmas which are facing us. And you as a member there have admitted that you have part of your ward which is in favour, part of your ward which is against, and you as the member will have to come down on one side or the, and that is the dilemma facing you. It'll also be facing Patrick and other members. It is not a simple case of yay or nay, is it? A real problem. Mike, back to you and choose these.
Yes, it's Councillor. You mentioned Patrick. It's Councillor Keating that wants to speak next.
Right.
See.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I would fully endorse all the points that Councillor Hamilton was making there, and I think we really do need to recognise that this project will have potentially negative impacts on residents downstream in Churchill, Sandford, and other areas. One, both through perhaps an increase of traffic along those routes and related issues around air quality and the impact on our infrastructure. But I think we also need to address up front some of the concerns residents, particularly in Churchill, have, that a large part of the underpinning of the business case for this fund granting is the development of several thousand new houses. I know that from updates from officers, we've been assured that will be tied into the local plan and nothing is done and dusted in terms of where those houses are placed. But there is a serious concern that this is a way to get the Garden Villages plan back on the table in some way, or that those additional thousands of houses will be placed in and around Churchill. So I think as we go through this process, we need to be very transparent about that and very clear about how we address residents' concerns around those impacts. And I think I'd also endorse Karen's final point about active travel. I think we've had a very excellent presentation from Colin around all the things we need to do around active travel. And I think there's huge opportunities with this bypass. Yes, it's primarily aimed at easing car traffic through Banwell, but if we ensure that the infrastructure for cycling and walking and other forms of active travel are part of those plans, we've got a real opportunity to connect up that part of Weston through Banwell into the Strawberry Line and out to the other villages. So I think there are some exciting opportunities here, and it behooves us as a SPEDA committee to make sure those are not lost, as well as addressing some of the potential negative impacts of the project. Thanks.
We have no more speakers, Chair. Nobody else has asked to speak.
And I think the fact that nobody else is speaking is not out of any shrugging of the shoulders, and it's not in my backyard. But I think we all face this common dilemma. We just don't quite know which way to turn. So when members don't know which way to turn, sorry, officers, we're coming to you for some guidance in how you think we ought to be going. And I need to emphasise again that I fully understand the fears that the garden village will resurrect itself, but I am assured that is not linked to this scheme. I hope I do not have to eat my words. The two Jonathans, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just laying my hand there. Yes, so in terms of response back to some of the questions, I'll come on to some of those in a moment, but just to reiterate that point, that absolutely the GDA is a standard document as part of this grant bid process that other councils and authorities across the country are having to sign up to and work through. So whilst we can negotiate on one or 2 points, it's not a document that has been drafted from scratch, bespoke to us. It does make reference in there to clearly having to go through due process, be that both through planning, be that through public inquiries, any CPO processes, etc. So all of those processes will have to be completed and will be done independently and not influenced through this particular scheme. The council has many instances where it will be both planning authority and developer interest. That's quite normal for us, where we have schools, where we're putting in infrastructure, etc. And we have very good, robust processes in place to keep those separate that come in. The point's well made in terms of the Sandford point. I think we can reflect that within the report. It certainly is something within our comms and engagement plans that we are very aware of. And I do take that point in terms of, yes, whilst there are some benefits for one area, I suppose the focal point in the reports that we're trying to get across there is the issue that is at Banwell Village in terms of the backing up and the car infrastructure, but it is acknowledging that in one area we do need to consider the wider piece. Some of the points in terms of the route. Now, the route has been protected for a number of years, or referenced at least within local plans, going back many years. Many of the points in terms of the detail that were raised around any impacts or areas that it goes through, that's very much part of the design process and the works that we need to go through in terms of what impacts that will have. We need to do the surveys, we need to go out and have a look at that, and of course that will form part of the planning application that, should we proceed with executive accepting this decision, that we will have to work and design through. In terms of COVID, I suppose because this is a long-term project, much like with the Metro West one that earlier I presented on, there are some very much short-term impacts, but as we've talked with active travel and different bits, there will be some opportunities that come out of this. So I think the acute issues that we're found in construction, etc., at the moment around social distancing, price increases, or supply chain issues, by the time we would be subject to a lot of decision-making and approvals, be looking to get on site with this scheme. We would like to think that COVID would not be here. There may well be another issue, but we don't see that as being quite as large as it would be if we were about to start on site, like with some schools at the moment. In terms of the comment around the road, because I know we focused a lot on the bypass, I would just like to draw members' attention that there is a significant part of this bid, if not in equal value, that is also for a high school. This is linked to the Locking Parklands development, and this is something that as an authority we do have significant pressures and a real live issue with, that we have those children in the system already, and we do need to make sure that we do give equal weighting in this consideration to the high school element of this bid as well, in terms of what are already some approved applications over at Locking Parklands, where we will be hitting trigger points very soon with developers who won't be able to continue because of needing to provide those school points. In terms of the point on climate agenda, that's focused very strongly in our bid and very strongly in previous reports that have been taken through. I take the point that it's not reflected as much in this report, but that's probably as much for repetition as anything. It was a key part of the report that was taken through to council. And just to remind members that on the school side, BREEAM is something that we are targeting in terms of excellent, if not better. And in terms of the bypass element, we're looking at a system that's called Past 2080, which is about trying to deliver as carbon neutrally as possible. And active travel and all of those elements are very much a strong part of what is in this bid. So this is where we are definitely linking in with Colin earlier. And I suppose in terms of reporting structures, Colin's my client in this. I'm the delivery arm. So this all started with Colin and Colin's team. So it is very much joined up with all of that thinking that we have from Colin from the strategic transport and planning side of things. I hope I've covered most of the points that were coming through, but feel free if anyone has any further questions or bits you just wanted to clarify to come back.
Other speakers, Mike? Or
no speakers, Chair.
I've just unmuted myself. I've just got one little follow. I had one comment from one of my residents, who asked whether the school and the bypass are inextricably linked. Is there any way of disentangling those two?
That's a really good question for Jonathan.
So I'll start, and then the other Jonathan can come in if needs be. But the program, the grants program, is looked at as one in terms of its benefits. So the grant development agreement does cover both elements. It covers the school and it covers the bypass. However, the processes of then the delivery are reflected in there as being separate, because of course you may well get your planning for one, you may not get it for another. So that is something very much that, yes, we have raised with Homes England, and you would be able to proceed with one if the other wasn't able to go ahead or incurred delays. However, we need to be mindful that what that will link back to is our original grant submission that went in, the scoring that would have happened with that in terms of homes that could be unlocked, potential, etc., and the benefits. And that is something we would have to discuss with Homes England if that situation arose. But it is something that is definitely recognised within, as I say, the nationally standard grant development agreements, because this situation could happen with any authority where they do have complex bids that are linked with more than one site. You may be able to proceed with one and not the other. But as mentioned, the risk then is about how the overall assessment may be affected from where we scored very highly nationally by what we put into the original bid. So that is the only caveat that is within the grant determination agreement that we would have to cross with Homes England. I wasn't sure, Jonathan, if there was any other points you wanted to just make on that.
No, I'd just draw members' attention to the fact that there are sort of several distinct go, no-go decision points within the GDA. So, you know, there's the ability for drawing down the grant funding to get us to certain levels and levels of progress on each of those elements. So, you know, at this point in time, and I suppose this is one of the key aspects for SPEDA to sort of consider how this forum wants to review. We don't want to be taking things to you guys just a note. We want a sort of meaningful and active engagement in terms of scrutiny from you guys. So I think one of the key things we'd bring to your attention is the ability, how do we build a productive and constructive scrutiny panel to advise us as we go through the go, no-go decision points.
And that's in the plural. So the go, no-go decision points. I'm at a slight loss to understand how many.
Yep, there are three. There are specific go no go decisions linked to preliminary works, enabling works, and construction works for all of those elements of the HIF bid. So again, it's the school, the bypass, the online transport improvements, and the utility upgrades, and each one of those we're linking to a go no go decision. Derek, for me to suggest, but obviously we try and build the scrutiny process around those aspects, if not further visibility through the progress of each one of those phases. But absolutely, we have the ability to effectively walk away, both parties, at either of those points. So Homes England could also do the same, but there'll be no clawback of monies invested at those stages. So for us, it's an opportunity. We have the opportunity to explore the options through active engagement with the communities, build those through the scrutiny panel, and obviously we have jump off points built into the GDA.
Right. I think we need perhaps a little more clarity on exactly what we could do if we found we wished to intervene at any of those stages. I'm not suggesting we will, but we need to know what we can do and what we can't do, and what the effects of taking such action would be. And I'm very pleased to hear you don't want us to be simply a noting scrutiny panel. You've made a rod for your own back there. That's okay.
The only part I was going to mention, Chair, is in the reports that went through to full council, there's, I recall, a table in there where I think we had outlined, particularly linked to the financial sections, some of those go no-go decision points. So I think going forward, very much taking a steer that what we'll do is we will look to focus on those, try to build a programme around it of when we would be appropriate times to come back to engage with scrutiny, given plenty of time around those elements, because they are very much linked to some of the key themes and approval processes or not that we need to achieve. So I think that for me is the embryonic start of what programme we would look to put forward to you as scrutiny as to when we would look to come back and when we would engage around them.
Right, so I'm just looking at the documentation. This is all going to the executive very soon. The executive approves it. What powers do we then have if we wish to scrutinise what they have then accepted?
So if the executive do choose to approve and accept the grant development agreement, what they are effectively signing up to are the terms and conditions of the grant. What they're not signing up to is the be all and end all of delivery. So within the grants termination agreement that you would have seen and within the red papers, you will see where some of those X opportunities could be, the reasons where those X opportunities may come in, and pretty much it's about following a project programme. So the grant development agreement says we will look to accept grants and we will start on that journey of carrying out site investigations. We will start to be able to engage with the communities more than we have at the moment, and we will engage with professional services. Once those professional services are involved, that will give us the opportunity to scrutinise and see what is coming out of those on-site surveys, those reviews. Back to Councillor's questions around some of those areas of outstanding natural beauty. What is it that may be happening in those areas? Does the design need to go through there or not? What opportunities are there for delivering the school or the road carbon neutrally? So one of the first things we'll be commissioning will be an environmental specialist that will look at this and say from day one, where are the opportunities that you can look to deliver this carbon neutral? And that will have, say, some cost implications. It may mean that we are using certain materials, or we may need to put things in play that may have a cost impact. And it may be that we have to look at then cutting our cloth accordingly on other elements of the bid. So there's lots of really tangible items that we would get involved in. Should the executive accept the GDA, it's not a fait accompli that the GDA therefore means scheme has to happen. We have to go on a very long journey back to the go no go points of proving and testing points within it that says yes, we are able to proceed based around cost, programme and quality, the three managers of project delivery.
But one way or another, we have got to provide that school by 2023. Otherwise, we will end up with more pupils than desks.
Correct. We do have those pupils in the system at the moment, and the order, I believe, that was taken with Cabot Learner Federation, I think that's now been announced that they will be the academy provider for this particular site, whilst we are linking that with the Winterstoke 100 site, and there are some opportunities there. We, yes, will have more children than desks, and we may actually miss out on one or two opportunities for being able to dovetail in between those two sites in terms of facility mix. So we are on a very, very key critical path with the school element in particular.
Would it be, if Mike, are there any other speakers?
There are no other speakers.
No. I mean, would it be accurate to say that we, to use that awful phrase, we note your report, but we also note the reservations, which have been very cogently put by the two most affected members, and we also understand the dichotomy that exists, but somewhere along the line we're going to have to come down on one side or the other, and that's why we're politicians.
I think that's very fair, and I think as the parish liaison officer for those two particular areas as well, I do regularly get to engage and to find that exact dichotomy that the councillor mentioned between the different sides. So absolutely, I suppose how I would summarise it with the GDA is to be able to have some of the answers to some of the points and questions that come through. That's what the GDA enables. It allows us to make a start on answering some of these and starting to get underneath some of the issues. That's really what the GDA allows us to do, is start the process.
Okay, if only life was simple. Right. This then is noted. Our reservations are noted. We will continue to play an active role. Does any member, I think this would help the process of the meeting coming to a conclusion. Does any member wish to discuss the red paper? Would you please indicate? Because if you do, I must go into exempt. Right. And just by way of explanation to the public who might be thinking, what on earth are we agreeing to behind closed doors on red papers? The only reason the red paper work is exempt is because there are some commercially sensitive considerations in those papers. I can assure you that if you are an insomniac, you really ought to take the paper to bed, and you'll be asleep within a few minutes. But it is purely for that commercially sensitive reason that we can't discuss it in public. So if we're not going to, then the problem doesn't arise, and the nature of this emergency item has been cleared. So I think that brings us to the end of the session. It was quite a lot on the agenda, and we've got through it in 2 hours, so thank you all very much. I would greatly appreciate, I mentioned at the opening statement that if any members of the public have questions about the way we conduct these meetings, I'd like to throw that back to my colleagues, all of you on the other screens as well. If you think there's any way in which the chairman needs to attend to his chairing, please either let me know en masse or let me know privately. So thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.